Hello, I'm Mariam Mashiri, and this is the Iran War Today, bringing you up to date with all you need to know as concerns grow a ceasefire could have collapsed after strikes resumed between the US and Iran. Well, let's start with what's happened in the region.
Whoa.
The US fired at more than 80 Iranian targets overnight. These pictures show blasts in the Iranian port city of Bandar Abbas. They also targeted 60 small attack boats. Donald Trump says the US will hit Iran hard again tonight. Iranian forces hit back fast. Air raid sirens sounded in Kuwait and in Bahrain as Iran targeted US military sites in both countries. Tehran claims to have struck 85 sites with missiles and drones. The US has also reimposed sanctions on Iranian oil, sanctions it had lifted as part of the extended ceasefire agreement last month. Oil prices jumped as a result of the renewed strikes. Well, all this in the last 24 hours, leaving everyone asking one question. Is the ceasefire over? Here's President Trump's answer.
To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. I'll speak to our negotiators. They want to negotiate. They're good people. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. But they have to come back to me. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time dealing with them. They're liars. We make a deal. And if I make a deal with him, we have a deal. And he goes out, he talks. We make a deal. Everyone's agreed. No nuclear weapon. We make a deal. They go outside, talk to the press. They say, we never even talked about it. There's something wrong with them. They're cuckoo. As far as I'm concerned, it's over.
Talks won't resume after we get through the funeral proceedings. Does this mean that talks with Iran will not resume?
I don't care. They can talk, but I think they're wasting their time. They're a bunch of lying guys.
Well, let's remind you of where things stood 24 hours ago. The Memorandum of Understanding between the US and Iran was designed to end the fighting. It was signed by President Trump on the 17th of June and set out a 60-day timetable for a final agreement between the sides. Until now, it's mostly worked with only small and brief exchanges between the two countries. And talks in Doha were making progress towards a lasting peace deal. In fact, Qatari mediators and the Iranians had called the talks positive. Even US Vice President J.D. Vance said they were going well. Another round of talks were already in the diary. It's now unclear if they will continue. So could all that progress get thrown out of the window in the space of 24 hours? Here's Ben Chu with what we know about how this all started.
Here is the context. 3 vessels have been reported to have been hit in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz in recent days. The Al Rekayat, an LNG tanker on the 6th of July, the Wejan, a crude oil tanker, and the Cyprus Prosperity, a crude oil tanker, on the 7th of July. Iran has been accused of launching the attacks, with analysts saying Tehran is likely attempting to ensure that vessels travel through its own designated route through the strait, so it can charge them to do so. At 9:15 p.m. UTC on the 7th of July, in retaliation for the ship strikes, US CENTCOM announced it had launched powerful strikes against Iran, and reports suggest strikes at these locations: Bandar Abbas, Kuhestak and Sirik. Now, we verified these bits of footage from the aftermath of a strike in the Iranian port city of Bandar Abbas. And on the 8th of July, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it had launched its own retaliation strikes on US military bases in Bahrain and also in Kuwait. This resumption of hostilities is likely to reduce the number of ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, through which 1/5 of the world's supply of oil and liquefied natural gas normally passes. Indeed, it's already been falling. Before the war, traffic was more than 100 vessels every day. It fell to a handful after that. And this includes estimates of vessels crossing with their radio transponders turned off to avoid detection. Now, there was an uptick after the Memorandum of Understanding between the US and Iran was signed on the 17th of June, reaching a peak of more than 50 per day, around half of the pre-war level. But since then, it's come down again. While hostilities continue, this picture is likely to worsen, and that will have a negative impact on global energy prices. The global oil price has already risen pretty sharply over the past 3 days to just under $80 per barrel on Wednesday morning. Though, if we zoom out, we can see that the oil price is still well below its peak levels of around $120 a barrel in April and May. Although the longer hostilities continue and the longer traffic through the Strait of Hormuz remains too dangerous for ships to transit, we can expect energy prices to rise, putting a renewed squeeze on the global economy.
So, what's the view from the US? Is this really the end of the ceasefire, as Donald Trump has suggested? Our North America correspondent Nick Johnson is in Washington. Nick, what's the latest from the US side?
Well, despite all that rhetoric we've heard from Donald Trump speaking at the conclusion of that NATO summit in Turkey, he said the ceasefire deal is over. He's described the Iranian leadership as scum. He says that the United States will hit Iran probably harder tonight. But I think we'll only get a real signal of what that means for the future of the ceasefire agreement. A, if those strikes go ahead. Donald Trump has previously threatened strikes against Iran and then pulled back at the last minute. Number two, if those strikes do go ahead, what will they look like? At the moment, the United States military has struck targets, coastal targets in Iran, sites where Iran might have launched those attacks against commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. If those strikes continue in that form, both Washington and Tehran might say they're proportionate, considering Iran has struck those commercial ships. But Donald Trump and the US military has threatened to go harder and deeper. So if the United States strikes again tonight, and if those strikes focus on civilian infrastructure, go deeper into the country away from the strait, focus on things like bridges, for example. Donald Trump has been talking about the ability of the US military to wipe out every bridge in the country. Well, if those strikes take that shape, then that might signal that the ceasefire is in real jeopardy. But it's worth saying, just lastly, we have been here before. There have been tit-for-tat exchanges between the US and Iran as recently as only around 10 days ago, and then those ceasefire talks continue. But I think, Mariam, this is just another test of a ceasefire that's already looking increasingly fragile.
Nick, thank you. What about Iran? Let's look now at Tehran and what it said in the wake of this latest exchange of strikes. With me is Parham Gobadi from the BBC Persian Service. Parham, what exactly have we heard from Iran in terms of where we are with the state of the ceasefire?
It's quite interesting because we're seeing fire amid the ceasefire. So Donald Trump has gone from calling the Iranian, the new, as he calls them, the new leaders in Iran, as rational people, to calling them cuckoo today and scums. Regardless, the message we're hearing from Iran is the message of defiance. So several Iranian authorities have spoken, and they're all sending the same message. The latest one in the past 20 minutes is Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who has said that the derogatory language does not diminish the greatness of Iranian nation, and he has said that we do not answer vulgarity with vulgarity, but with action, fearlessly and with great valor. Also, before that, Iranian chief negotiator Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said almost similar things. He said that the era of bullying and extortion is over and that it leads to nowhere, we won't fold. So Iranians are trying to show that they will not bend under pressure, military pressure from the United States. And he also emphasized, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, that the Iranian adjustments have been violated. Iran is really adamant to say that from their perspective, they say that, okay, the ceasefire, it's supposed to be free to transit through the Strait of Hormuz for 60 days, but we were the ones who were in charge of coordination. So they think that because of the Omani route, another route that is opened by Oman and the United States and other countries, they see that as a betrayal and a violation of the ceasefire. The other side sees the Iranians targeting ships and cargoes and tankers through the Strait of Hormuz as the violation of the ceasefire. And this is the reason that many pundits before that warned that because the text, this is the fifth amendment of that Memorandum of Understanding, they said it was vague and it's open to interpretation, and that might lead to a conflict that we're seeing right now.
Okay, Farham, thank you. Well, if the ceasefire really is over and fighting escalates back into all-out war, it's likely to see the entire region dragged back into the conflict. Our correspondent Caroline Davies is in Jerusalem. Caroline, are there concerns in the region that this could descend back into an all-out war?
Well, I think many in the region will be looking at the mixed messages that President Trump gave today and try and work out exactly what might be happening next and how Iran might respond. Now, firstly, here in Israel, of course, the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed between the US and Iran was a political nightmare for President Netanyahu. He was not party to it. He was not at the table when it was made. And yet the US expected him to keep to what it had agreed, namely that they should not be attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon all the time while President Netanyahu is trying to portray himself to his voters as being tough on security. Now, interestingly, President Trump did also make some quite positive comments about President Netanyahu in the course of today, and that's after a few weeks when we've had some public rebukes from the US on him. Of course, you look at this in a wider lens, you look at the Gulf, there will be major concerns about a deterioration, not just because of the concerns about oil and gas exports, but about security too. They will not want strikes, of course, to come back to hit them too. And I think also the speed with which things seem to have deteriorated so quickly today, if there are strikes, it just shows again how fragile the situation is and how quickly things can turn.
Caroline, thank you. So what about the reaction globally? Well, the comments from Donald Trump that took this from another tit-for-tat series of strikes between Iran to a potentially ceasefire-ending moment came in Turkey at the NATO summit. Leaders gathered in Ankara have been discussing increased defence spending and greater support for Ukraine, but the latest escalation in the Middle East has dominated the headlines and indeed the agenda today. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner is there and gave us this analysis on the mood in Ankara after those attacks.
Very supportive, I think, from pretty much everybody, from Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, from President Erdogan, the host of this summit, the Turkish president, and others that I've spoken to in the defense community, all very supportive, because what on earth possessed Iran to go and risk breaking this ceasefire by targeting those 3 commercial ships? What did they think was going to happen? Of course, the US was going to retaliate.
So, support from NATO leaders today, but will they be supportive or if this keeps going? Well, during his many press appearances today, Donald Trump hinted multiple times the US isn't done.
Mr. President, it seems that the war with Iran may start again. What do you expect from your European allies?
I don't think it's going to start again. I think it's going to go very quickly. They hit a couple of ships, and so we hit them much harder. When they hit, we hit 10 times harder. You know, we hit much harder than they do. We have a lot better equipment than they do. We may even, somebody asked before, do you think you'll hit them tonight? I said, we might, yeah, we might. But when they hit, we hit, you know. It's what we use their language, we speak their language. No, I don't think so. I think anything that happens is going to be over very quickly.
So, where does this leave us? Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, is with me now. Jeremy, what options does the US have now, do you think?
Well, its best option is to actually find a way to negotiate, I'd say, because it's been really quite interesting today, because I've just done a TV package, and it included some video released by the Pentagon of this extraordinary Top Gun-style array of American fighting ships filmed in the Arabian Sea, it says, sometime last month. But they chose to release it today, which is, I think, the significance. Aircraft carriers, helicopters, jet bomber, you name it, it's there. But the whole point about all of this is that despite America's extraordinary military power, despite the fact that it has demonstrated it can break whatever it wants in Iran, what it hasn't been able to break is the will of the regime in Tehran to give up the red lines that it has decided it's going to have. And one of the reddest of red lines, you might say, is control of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz because they want the option of keeping their thumbs on the windpipe of the global economy because they've demonstrated that's what they can do.
But that memorandum of understanding was signed. Was it, do you think, ambiguous, a bit wishy-washy, as Parham alluded to earlier?
Well, the language in it is ambiguous, and particularly, I think it's Article 5 of the 14 points, which is the one about navigation, which is open to different kinds of interpretation. After the last flare-up, which was caused by this kind of ambiguity, there was talk about clarifying it. Now, clearly it has not been clarified, and also there's the physical presence of, because what's going on at the moment is that the main channel through the strait is mined, and that process of demining is going on. So what Iran wants is for the channel which goes right near their coastline to be used by any shipping that goes through, and that what happened was that shipping is using the other side, and that's something which they're not prepared to tolerate. And because the control of the strait is so important to them, even if it means getting bombed, even if it means that Donald Trump starts threatening that the talks are over, when clearly actually they probably aren't, they are prepared to take that risk. First of all, because they think they can get away with it, and second of all, because for them, these are really important principles.
So if they're prepared to take the risk, that puts America in a very difficult position, doesn't it?
Yeah, because here's the situation. Starting on the 28th of February, the regime in Tehran was confronted by its worst nightmare, a joint attack by the Americans and the Israelis, with the leaders of both countries making speeches saying pretty explicitly, though they kind of deny it now, this is about regime change. Well, Trump has absolutely denied it was about that. That's what he said, though. He said he made a speech about it. And so they faced that, and they got through it. They survived. And now, you think of the symbolism of this multi-day funeral of the late supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He was killed on the first day of the war, and the cunning plan of the Americans and the Israelis was that you kill the leader, the head of the snake, as they may have said, and the regime would collapse. They got it completely wrong. That's not the way that the regime was engineered for survival, not reliant on one man. And instead of that now, this has now become the symbol of the survival of the regime, of the fact it's been emboldened, of the fact it believes it has been strengthened, and that the Americans have come up against the limits of their military power. Never mind Top Gun style videos. The fact is, if you can't break the will of the hard men at the top of the Iranian regime, then the only other way to get through this, probably, and to reverse out of it for the Americans, is to do some kind of a deal which will require concessions, which they're not that happy to make, I think.
And what about internally in Iran? Before February, we saw those protests, didn't we? Many thousands of people in Iran were killed by the regime. What of the internal domestic opposition? Is there internal domestic opposition, and what kind of an impact do you think it could have on the government and the regime?
I don't think those many millions of Iranians who are against the regime have changed their minds. Far from it. But the combination of what happened in January, you go out in the streets, you risk getting killed, and the fact now that the regime is, kind of all guns blazing and feeling very prickly and strong, I think they're keeping a very low profile. Probably from a human point of view, sensibly. At the same time, the regime supporters, in their thousands, have been on the streets mourning the death of the supreme leader.
And regionally, what is the impact now? Because obviously no one in the region wants to be dragged back into any kind of war, but they're pretty powerless, aren't they, right now, those mediators?
Well, first of all, America's co-belligerent, Israel, this is politically very difficult for Netanyahu facing elections. For the Arab Gulf allies of the Americans, they're responding in different ways. The Emiratis have got doubled down on their relationship with Israel. The Saudis, something different. The Qataris, something different. But what they're all doing is reassessing. And the model was zone of stability, people invest, tourists come, business gets done, American bases on your soil gives you a guarantee. Turns out it doesn't give you a guarantee to have American bases on. So what I hear from people is that they're reassessing everything. Political ties, the way they calibrate their militaries, building more pipelines so they can avoid the Strait of, but that's going to take a few years to try to do that sort of thing. And what I'm hearing from inside the mediation process, from the talks, is that neither side is threatening to walk away. However, it's taking what was described to me as a lot of heavy lifting to try to get them to re-engage in, because the atmosphere now clearly is, it had no trust anyway. Now it's way more soured by everything that's happened.
Okay, Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. Jeremy Bowen, our international editor. Well, of course, you can read more about the Iran war on the BBC's website, where we have updated stories from our correspondents, both on the ground and here in London. But whether you are joining us on YouTube, on TikTok, on Sounds, on radio or on television, thank you so much for your time. You've been watching the Iran War Today on BBC News.